So we had left off last week on the last paragraph of page 113. So we're in the back portion of the book right now. And to put that into perspective, this is chapter 8. We have 11 chapters plus the doctor's opinion. So it's actually 12 chapters in this book in the first portion. Of 12 chapters, we have chapter 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. Remember they said clear-cut directions are in the first portion of the book? That's 12 chapters. 5 of 12 chapters is over 40. I think it's like 42%. 42% of the clear-cut directions in this book are about one thing: how to work with other people. How important do you think that is? We found in the doctor's opinion, they said that the basis of the AA recovery program works in 3 parts. It worked in 3 parts for Bill. It says he got well. He acquired certain ideas, it says, about a possible means of recovery. He put it into practice, he got well. So he recovered. That's only part 1. Because then it says, as part of his rehabilitation, it continued, he had to pass this on to other alcoholics. So that was part of his rehabilitation. The third piece of it, so 3-part deal, the third piece was those who recovered that he worked with. It was that he impressed upon them that they must do likewise with others. 2 out of 3 of the parts have to do with working with other people. Only one part, 1/3, has to do with me. The rest of it has to be doing with working with other people. We see that? 2/3 has to do with other people. Only 1/3 has to do with me. So when we found out a little bit later on in the book that our problem wasn't alcohol, that our problem was selfishness, self-centeredness, well, then it probably makes kind of sense that only 1/3 of this has to do with me and 2/3 of this has to do with working with other people and thinking about other people, because we're not used to doing that. So that's what this is about, and that's what we're doing. So on page 113 is, again, where we left off. In this chapter, it says 2 wives. And these last chapters, sometimes they call it AA like the forgotten chapters, because we don't read them very often, because we think that it ends with step 12 in chapter 7, where it's entitled Working with Others. So we at least got a clue that that is step 12, working with others. But all that we found so far, those of you who have been here through the first half of this chapter so far, we have found a lot of clear-cut directions in here for us with working with family members as well. Because remember, in the doctor's opinion, when they talked about those 3 things, the doctor said after that statement of the 3 things that Bill did, he said, this has become the basis of this rapidly growing fellowship of these men and their families. So they were working with family members as well. And a basis, again, if you don't know what a basis is defined by Webster as a fixed pattern of doing things. That means it's still like that today. It is a fixed pattern. I get well, I help others, I impress upon them that they work with others. That is the fixed pattern. That is the clear-cut directions. And fixed, by the way, I even looked that word up. Sometimes you look up a word in a dictionary, you got to look up some of the words, what it says. Figure you know what fixed meant, but every once in a while I look up words. Fixed means not subject to change or fluctuation. So our basis is not subject to fluctuation or change. It is a fixed pattern of doing things. And that is why it works. Those are the clear-cut directions, and that's what makes it rare for people to fail. So in this chapter, it says 2 wives. On page 104, it says, this is written by, it says, among us are wives, relatives, and friends whose problem has been solved. So what they're not saying there, which you might take it as, oh, their husbands got well. That's their problem. It's their husband. But that is not the problem that we find here. We found later it talks about how they had rendezvous with hurt pride, frustration, self-pity, misunderstanding, and fear, which we already found in step 4 are what? Manifestations of self. See, alcoholics are not the only ones who have a problem with selfishness and self-centeredness. Now, although in the book here, it does say that alcoholics are an extreme example of self-will run riot. We did also find that it did say that the first requirement for step 3 was to be convinced that any life run on self-will, any life, not just an alcoholic, any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. And the more we run life on self-will, the less successful we are. And see, that's kind of backwards from what a lot of us think when we come into AA for the first time. We think that, we come through here and I got all these problems because of my drinking. And then we think, well, then obviously to get rid of my problems, what do? You stop drinking, right? But we found that stop drinking is the same as the word sober, right? And sober is defined as 2 words, not drunk. Not drunk, that's it. Now, of the 8 of you that raise your hand that are less than 6 months, any of you drunk right now? Okay, that's good. Any of you drunk at your first meeting? Well, your problem was solved. Why did you keep coming? You weren't drunk? Problems didn't go away? No. What we found is that we have problems, and then we turn to alcohol as a solution to those problems. Alcohol is a solution, not the problem. We have to turn our minds around on that. And the problems were caused by selfishness and self-centeredness. That's why they said in the beginning that our way of living has its advantages for all, right? That's for everyone, because no one is beyond selfishness and self-centeredness. It's an advantageous way of living, but for an alcoholic or an addict, it is vital, not optional for recovery, according to Alcoholics Anonymous. So what have we learned in here as far as clear-cut directions go in the first portion of this book? One thing on page 107, it said that under these conditions, basically, the 2 pages talked about living with an alcoholic, we naturally made mistakes. Some of them rose out of ignorance of alcoholism. We learned that this book is to teach us about to comfort and inform all of those who are affected, the alcoholic and anybody else who is affected. Had we fully understood the nature of the alcoholic illness, we might have behaved differently. So from there, they're going to go on, they're going to talk about their mistakes that they made. And they're going to talk about saying, you don't need to repeat them. So these are going to be the recommendations that we have for you to be successful with somebody who is either drinking or early in recovery. This is the way that we have found to be most effective to be helpful to them and for ourselves. So clear-cut directions. Who's going to teach them that? Who's going to teach them out of this book? That's our job. That is our job to do that. They go on to say that over and over and over in here. So we got into learning about the 4 different types of alcoholics, or not alcoholics, the 4 different types of drinkers, I should say, right? And there were various different stages that the book broke it down. The drinker number 1, it could be a heavy drinker, but he's convinced he can still control it. He'd be insulted if you call him an alcoholic. It progresses into the drinker number 2, drinker number 3, and drinker number 4. The thing that we found in them while they progressed, as far as how much or how often they were drinking and the consequences they were paying, that has nothing to do, we have learned thus far, with making them an alcoholic or not. What we found in each one of those captions is, does the person know that they're helpless? Or do they think they can still control or moderate? They can stop or moderate. Are they convinced that they can't? That is what is going to determine whether they're an alcoholic or not. Not their age, not how much they drank, not if you're male or female. None of that matters. None of it matters. Page 44, you'll read that. 2 things that determine whether you're an alcoholic. Whether you can stop when you honestly want to for good, or if when you honestly want to, you try to control the amount you drink and you have little control over the amount when you drink. I go out to have 2 or 3 and that's it. And then I end up having more than that. And that repeatedly happens. That's what makes us an alcoholic. So they went into, obviously, as a person further progresses, what happens is it talks about how they, when we get to, I think it was the drinker number 3, it says, you can be quite hopeful of a case like this. Now, this guy's all the way down the line here at number 3, right? He's almost down to number 4. And that's a guy you can be hopeful of. Why? Why? Because he's going to be more desperate. He's hurting more. We don't know what it takes for each person. They talk about sometimes in AA, not in the book, they talk about you got to hit your bottom. And the thing is, nobody ever defines what that bottom is. What is the bottom, right? Well, it's different for everybody. It's, the best explanation I ever had that somebody told me is the bottom, because I asked that once when I was a teenager coming to AA. What is the bottom? Where's the bottom? The guy said, well, you hit bottom when you put the shovel down, stop digging. So whenever you give up, could be 2 inches down, could be 6 foot under. It's up to you. It's whatever your pain tolerance or threshold is that beats us into a state of reasonableness. So we got to find that state, and it's different for every one of us. So you could be any one of these. The point is, when we get to husband number 3, it says on the top page 110, he may have to come to the point where he desperately wants to stop, but cannot. And you can be hopeful of such a situation. Now, on page 111, we start getting into some of the clear-cut directions they're given to those. Again, this says 2 wives, but at the beginning of the chapter on 104, it doesn't say it's 2 wives. It says that this chapter is meant for anyone that is tied by blood or affection to the alcoholic, right? And that's why we welcome anyone and everyone here. So the first principle of success, they say, if you're dealing with an alcoholic, a loved one, is that you should never be angry. like I say, you're going to be teaching this to the family. That is not going to be an easy one. You better be really well prepared for a long conversation on that one because you're not moving on from that point very easily. Do not be angry. Are you kidding me with what this person is doing to our family, to myself, and to themselves? Don't be angry no matter what they do. Or are you kidding? Right? But didn't we learn? What's the number one offender for an alcoholic? And doesn't it say that resentment kills more alcoholics than anything? It doesn't say that it's alcohol that kills more alcoholics than anything. It's resentment that's going to kill them. That's why we don't want them to be angry. And it says we need to look at them as alcoholics. We learn that we have to look at people who we feel offended us, right? As sick people to say, and ask God to save us from being. They're saying the same thing to those tied by love or affection. Look at them as if they're sick people because they are. You know, we're going to go through the first 3 chapters with somebody, you know, whenever we work with new people, we go through the first 3 chapters with the loved ones, the person that's closest to them, if they're willing, to explain this alcoholism illness so they understand why this is and why they do what they do. You know, so do not be angry. Next paragraph says you should never tell him what he must do about his drinking. Now that's a hard one too, because they're always wanting to tell you what you need to do about your drinking. But didn't we already read that frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices? Anybody get frothy emotional appeal from somebody close to you saying, you got to stop drinking? Or even ultimatums. You're either going to stop or I'm out, right? Did that work? No. Why? Because of the mental illness. We do not, when we drink, not all the time, but it says that what makes us different than normal people is that at certain times, it says on top of page 24, that we are unable to reflect on those consequences. We're not even thinking about the ultimatum or the consequence. All we're thinking about is, my God, I need to feel better, and this is going to do it. And normal people don't have that happen. So they need to understand that. Do not tell them because it's pointless to do so. It says you're going to look like a nag or a killjoy is what it's telling. And then it goes on to say it's possible to have a full and useful life, though your husband continues to drink. Now that's going to be a hard one to choke down too, isn't it? You know, that's where it comes in very handy having other family members of alcoholics who are familiar with this and who have solved their problem, like they said in the beginning, to tell them. You know, there are certain people, I'm certain in Al-Anon, there's people that, you know, that still have alcoholics in their lives that still drink, that are living useful, productive lives, right? They need to hear from you. They need to hear from you. They need to hear that because that's totally possible. Do not set your heart on reforming your husband. Do these sound like clear-cut directions? Very clear-cut. Let him see that you want to be helpful rather than critical is what it says. So now we get to the top of page 13, first paragraph, 113, a couple sentences down. It says, avoid urging him to follow our program. Avoid urging him. The seed has been planted in his mind. Okay. He knows that thousands of men, much like himself, have got sober. Oh, no, that's not what it says. It says have recovered, right? Thousands of men and women have recovered. So once he's introduced to this, he now has an option. He or she now has an option, right? Up to this point, as alcoholics, or addicts, same thing. We don't have an option. We've tried every means to try to get over our drinking, have not been able to be successful in doing so. Now we're given a solution. So now you have a choice. And the question is, do you want it bad enough that you are willing to go to any lengths to get it? Because if you are not truly willing to go to any lengths to get it, then as the book says, you are not ready for certain steps and you're not ready to do this until you get to that point that you're willing to do anything. And when we talk about willing to do anything, it's not yet we can pay lip service to this all day. Yeah, I'm willing to do anything. You know, that's why whenever I meet with somebody new for the first time, hey, you know what, I really need help. You know, will you sponsor me? You know, I really need help. Read the doctor's opinion for this next week and meet me here at the meeting and we'll talk about it next week. If they don't show up next week, or if they show up and they hadn't read it for 7 days, does that sound like somebody who's willing to go to any lengths? If you're not willing to show up or read 7¼ pages for 7 days in a row, you are far from willing to go to any lengths. So if they do show up, then, take the next 7 days and we'll do it again. Not that I'm not going to waste my time, but myself, I only work with one person at a time. So if you're not willing to go any lengths, I'm moving to the next person, you know. And the book tells us if you're not ready, then what does it tell us to do? In the last chapter, when we're working with somebody new, the first thing we want to find out is if they want to get over their drinking. And if they don't want to get over it, it says we need to let them go. They're going to need some more convincing. They may need to go out and try some more controlled drinking until they can get beaten to a state of reasonableness or die. That's just the way it is. We can't convince them. The loved ones can't convince them. They must be convinced themselves. So then we get to the last paragraph on page 113 where we left off. And now we're getting into they're doing the recap on the four drinkers, and it says, you would suppose that men in the fourth classification would be quite hopeless. It's the guy at the bottom, right? The fourth. They don't talk about the fifth one because he's underground. We don't need to talk about him. This is the fourth. So you're right there. And it says that he would be quite hopeless. Well, hopeless, by definition, hopeless means no possibility of a solution. This guy's too far gone. And didn't the author state that they suffered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body? So this guy in number 4, they say he's going to be quite hopeless, but it says you might think he's quite hopeless, but that is not so. Many of Alcoholics Anonymous were like that. Everybody had given them up. Defeat seemed certain, yet often such men had spectacular and powerful recoveries. There are exceptions. Some men have been so impaired by alcohol that they cannot stop. Okay, and we read about that. The cannots and will nots, those are the ones that don't recover. Cannots, we know the will nots, they're just not willing, but there's certain people that cannot, and this is what they're talking about. They're so impaired that by alcohol that they cannot stop. Sometimes there are cases where alcoholism is complicated by other disorders. A good doctor or psychiatrist can tell you whether these complications are serious. So if you're working with somebody new, and they seem to may have some other complications, we don't tell them this is the only answer, right? Encourage them to see a doctor or psychiatrist if that's what they need to do. There may be other complications. We don't have any monopoly on this deal, right? So keep your mind open to that. In any event, try to have your husband read this book. We've read that over and over. Read this book. His reaction may be one of enthusiasm. If he's already committed to an institution, but can convince you and your doctor that he means business, give him a chance to try our method, unless the doctor thinks his mental condition too abnormal or too dangerous. We make this recommendation with some confidence. For years, we've been working with alcoholics committed to institutions. Since this book was first published, AA has released thousands of alcoholics from asylums, hospitals of every kind, even treatment centers. The majority have never returned. That's a hell of a statement, huh? Mm-hmm. The power of God goes deep. You may have the reverse situation on your hands. Perhaps you have a husband who is at large. Anybody ever want to be called at large? I'm out there, I'm at large. But who should be committed? Some men cannot or will not get over alcoholism. There it is again, cannot or will not. When they become too dangerous, we think the kind thing to do is to lock them up. But of course, a good doctor should always be consulted. The wives and children of such men suffer horribly, but not more than the men themselves. But, and I would underline, especially those of you that are working with new people, sometimes you must start life anew. We know women who have done it. If such women adopt a spiritual way of life, that would be our way of living, their road will be smoother. Doesn't say it's going to be smooth, but it will be smoother. And that's based on experience. This is not just projection or what they think. Remember, this is based on their experience. If your husband is a drinker, you probably worry what other people are thinking, and you hate to meet your friends. You draw more and more into yourself, and you think everyone is talking about conditions at your home. You avoid the subject of drinking, even with your own parents. You do not know what to tell the children. When your husband is bad, you become a trembling recluse, wishing the telephone had never been invented. We find that most of this embarrassment is unnecessary. While you need not discuss your husband at length, you can underline, quietly let your friends know the nature of his illness. But you must be on guard not to embarrass or harm your husband. So how can you tell your friends the nature of the illness? Well, what is the nature of the illness? What's the nature of the bodily illness? I have an allergy to alcohol, right? Put it in. I have a craving beyond my mental control to have more. You can stop at it right there. It's allergic to alcohol. That's it. Nature of the illness. When you have carefully explained to such people that he is a sick person, you will have created a new atmosphere. Barriers which have sprung up between you and your friends will disappear with the growth of sympathetic understanding. You will no longer be self-conscious or feel that you must apologize as though your husband were a weak character. He may be anything but that. Your new courage, good nature, and lack of self-consciousness will do wonders for you socially. The same principle applies in dealing with the children. Unless they actually need protection from their father, it's best not to take sides in any argument he has with them while drinking. Use your energies to promote a better understanding all around. Then that terrible tension which grips the home of every problem drinker will be lessened. Frequently, you felt obliged to tell your husband's employer and his friends that he was sick, when as a matter of fact, he was tight, meaning drunk. Avoid answering these inquiries as much as you can, and underline and highlight that, right? Clear-cut direction. Avoid answering them. Whenever possible, let your husband explain. Let the alcoholic explain. Your desire to protect him should not cause you to lie to people when they have a right to know where he is and what he's doing. Discuss this with him when he's sober and in good spirits. Ask him what you should do if he places you in such a position again. Get a little understanding there. You know, I don't want to lie for you. How do you think we should handle this the next time that it happens? It's a good, honest discussion to have. But be careful not to be resentful about the last time he did so. There's another paralyzing fear. You may be afraid your husband will lose his position. You are thinking of the disgrace and hard times which will befall you and the children. This experience may come to you, or you may have already had it several times. Should it happen again, regard it in a different light. Maybe it will prove a blessing. Underline, it may convince your husband that he wants to stop drinking forever. And now you know that he can stop if he will, if he wants to. That might be the bottom, right? Let it be. Time after time, this apparent calamity has been a boon for us, for it opened up a path which led to the discovery of God. We've elsewhere remarked how much better life is when lived on a spiritual plane. If God can solve the age-old riddle of alcoholism, highlight and underline, he can solve your problems too. Notice that is plural, your problems. Didn't we also learn earlier in the book that one of the guys who had recovered said just as important was the discovery that spiritual principles answered all my problems. That's what we're looking for here. Because remember, we started out with all these problems and turned to drinking. And in the doctor's opinion, it said that when we go through this cycle, at the very end of it, our problems pile up on us and become astonishingly difficult to solve. Let me ask you this, of the new people here, since it's probably fresher in your mind. Did you really come here to AA because you really wanted to stop drinking? Or did you come here because you couldn't stand the way you felt and all the consequences you were paying, and therefore your problems had piled up on you and become astonishingly difficult to solve? Because that's what we're here to show you, is how to solve those problems. We don't attack the alcohol problem. That is a hopeless condition. When we change the way we live and start depending upon God, that takes care of itself. We already found that out as well. Around step 9, doing step 10 and 11, the problem is removed, is what it says, the drinking problem. And it happens all by itself. Read that on the top of page 85. Happens all by itself. By us living spiritual principles, the rest of it gets taken care of. And it makes sense when you think about that cycle, because that's the only way to interrupt the cycle, right? I'm not going to be thinking of alcohol or drugs or whatever it is that's going to make me feel better if I already feel better. The problem is we don't feel good because of all these problems we have. So that's the way we interrupt it. What do we see here? Solve your problems too. We wives found that, like everybody else, I would underline this, we were afflicted with pride. We were afflicted with self-pity, vanity, and all the things which go to make up the self-centered person. And we were not above selfishness or dishonesty. There's the problem. As our husbands began to apply spiritual principles in their lives, we began to see the desirability of doing so too. Some of them, not all of them. I say my wife has nothing to do with this, nothing at all. Gives me my space to do, but it, that's just the way it is. It's not a bad thing. It's just the way it is. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. At first, some of us did not believe we needed this help. I'd ask anybody in Al-Anon or anybody who is here as a support member, and you think he's the problem or she's the problem, not me, right? No. Some of us didn't believe we needed that help. We thought on the whole, we were pretty good women capable of being nicer if our husband stopped drinking. But it was a silly idea that we were too good to need God. Kind of hard to make that statement, isn't it? Now we try to put spiritual principles to work in every department of our lives. Highlight and underline that. This is the family members. Now, so why do they do that? It says when we do that, we find it solves our problems too. When we think of helping others, that solves our problems too. The ensuing lack of fear, the ensuing lack of worry, lack of hurt feelings is a wonderful thing. We urge you to try our program. For nothing will be so helpful to your husband as the radically changed attitude towards him, which God will show you how to have. Go along with your husband if you possibly can. If you and your husband find a solution for the pressing problem of drink, you are, of course, going to be very happy. But all problems will not be solved at once. Seed has started to sprout in a new soil, but growth has only begun. In spite of your newfound happiness, there will be ups and downs. We read that at even, these ups and downs. It was on bottom of page 14. So while there will be ups and downs with the families, for the alcoholic, the last sentence on page 14, for if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots which lie ahead. And if he did not work, he would surely drink again. And if he drank, he would surely die. Then faith would be dead indeed. And with us, it's just like that. So it says here that we need to perfect and enlarge our spiritual life. Continue, as it says in step 10. Continue. Because it says there will be trials in low spots, because it says certain ones. It doesn't say maybe. They're going to happen. And it says you're not going to survive them. You know, you might be doing your 90 meetings in 90 days and 2 months into it and you're feeling good. And one major upsetting thing happens. Boom, back out again. Those of you, at least half of you that said that this isn't your first time around, you might be able to relate to that. You know, when asked, and ask yourself this, if you have tried this more than once and you went out and drank again. Why did you do it? With everything you had to lose, and you know you had to lose because that's why you quit, because you knew you had to lose something. Why do you think you drank? What was the excuse that made sense? I know I got to lose this, but look what I got to gain. It makes no sense whatsoever, right? There's zero control over that. It makes absolutely no sense. So anyhow, where are we at here? There's ups and downs. Many of the old problems will still be with you, and this is as it should be. Why are the old problems still going to be with us? Because we still have these character defects, right? That's why. The faith and sincerity of both you and your husband will be put to the test. So the faith and sincerity of both of you and your husband will be put to the test. These workouts should be regarded as part of your education. For thus, you will be learning to live. We're learning to live a whole new life, remember? Ideas, emotions, and attitudes are going to be thrown away, and a new set of conception and motives are going to be the guiding forces of our lives. Everything that we think and feel and act is going to be completely different because we are going to be living a life that's based on God guiding our life, not me guiding it anymore. That's completely new. So we're going to be learning to live. And this is not to happen overnight. You know, while it says in the back of the book, I believe we read that you can recover in a matter of months. You believe that? Matter of months, you can be recovered. These guys were working with people in 2-3 months, new people, coming out of asylums and started working with people in a matter of months. because those certain trials and low spots they knew were going to come and they're not going to survive them if they didn't. They're convinced of that. So they worked with new people. But it also says later that these new structures that we've torn down in our life, new structures will be built, but it will take years to rebuild. So this is a learning deal. You will make mistakes, but if you are in earnest, they will not drag you down. Instead, you will capitalize on them. A better way of life will emerge when they are overcome. And you know the best way that happens? It says to capitalize on them down spots. We'll see how our experience can benefit others, no matter how far down the scale we have gone. Anybody remember that sentence somewhere? No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we'll see how our experience can benefit others. I often talk about my suicide attempt at 14 years sober, right? Darkest part of my life. I think it's something I'd never want to talk about, but you will not believe that when I bring that up, how many people I hear of that have felt the exact same thing, being sober for a long time and wanting to die because they're not recovered, but they didn't even know that, right? It's a real thing. So we capitalize on it. That to me is one of the best assets I have today. The fact that I have relapsed, I don't know how many times for the first 10 years from the age of 14 to 24, in and out of AA, in and out of AA for 10 years. Any years that I relapsed, I know all about that game. I am an expert at that game. I'm also an expert at staying sober for a long period of time and not being recovered and being as miserable, if not more miserable than when I was drinking. I got experience with that too. And I also got experience with being recovered. So I think I got a full round knowledge of every different department there. Not what I intended when I was growing up to think this is where I'm going to be, but it is the most powerful asset that I have because the most meaningful thing in my life today is being able to help other people. We learn that we do it because we have to. They talked about that. They talked about that a lot, how we have to. But it also said, if you remember, at a certain point, that motive gets changed. We start doing it because we want to, because we see, like when you go through this process of making your inventory and getting with God and making your demands, I tell you what, life feels good. When you get, as it says, midway through step 9, you guys have heard the promises read before. If you look at that in the book on page 83, that's talking about when it says, if you are painstaking about this phase of your development, what phase of the development are we talking about? You better look in the book to find out where they're reading this from. The phase of development is halfway through step 9. That's when these things happen. That's when you recover and it feels great. But the book tells us you've barely scratched the surface. When you start working with other people, it is a whole new world from that even. It is incredible. And the other thing to realize, which is most important that they impress upon us, is that when you get to that point where you feel these promises happening, right? Through step 9, you got a clean slate. Life starts getting good. And the biggest warning they make with that is when life starts getting good, I ain't got time for this. I got my wife, my family back now, and I got a lot going on. I don't got time to work with other people. Well, I tell you what, there's going to be trials and low spots, and you're not going to survive them. You might for a while, but one of two things will happen if you're an alcoholic. You're either going to drink again or you're going to die. And I know that is a fact. Not only does the book say it, that's my experience and many other people's experience. It's kind of like in recovery, we're on this escalator is the way I look at it. That's going down and you're trying to walk up it. If you just stand still, you're slowly going to be moving down. We don't know how long you're going to be able to stay on it before you hit the bottom of it, but you have to keep doing some work just to stay where you are. That's the maintenance and growth of our spiritual experience. Right? We have to continue to grow it. So I think with there, we will stop for the day. And that is on page 117. We'll start on the first paragraph of that page.